Welcome to episode 309 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we will be talking about Dragon Age the Veilguard's release, Black Ops 6 is a hit, studio shutdowns, and much more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review if you're on Spotify or iTunes, or subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel and get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as a YouTube member or Twitch subscriber. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and all of my other content, check out the links in the show description. Let's jump right into that gaming news. We'll kick it off with Xbox. There is a new UI for the PC Xbox app that adds features like jump back in from the console UI, as well as a bunch of other general improvements. I feel like one of the only people who doesn't mind the Xbox app. I don't use it for much more than just downloading Game Pass games, mostly PC Game Pass. I have Ultimate. I have like 3 years of Ultimate saved up. And I think it's fine. I've never had major issues with it. Some people have had issues with download speed, I guess. I don't recall ever having issues, but maybe I just didn't notice. The biggest thing, actually for me, what's most frustrating is they've always had this Xbox app, right? Then they had the Microsoft Store too, which was a mess. And then they used to have the Xbox Companion app. And what you could do, what it was mostly for, was managing your like profile. It was a way you could stream your Xbox to your PC or to any PC where the app is, or you have it connected. I think it had to be on the same network. I could be wrong though. When I started streaming way back in 2017, I believe, I didn't have a capture card for years. At least the first year or two I streamed and made content, I had the Xbox Companion app on my screen. Right when I started, the Xbox Companion app on my screen, full screen, streaming my Xbox, which was in our living room. And I would use that to capture in OBS. I'd capture that window in OBS. And then to read chat, I had my phone set up with Twitch chat open so I could read it. And that was my stream at first. And then it's obviously grown since then. So that app was super cool. But what it did the best was you could access all of your captures, all of your screenshots and videos that you save. And then they shut down that companion app, and they didn't even just stop improving it. They shut it down. You can't use it anymore. It's gone. And then the Xbox PC app doesn't have the ability to see your captures, which is really frustrating because the phone app, at least the Android phone app, does. You can see all your captures. So it's one of those things where it's like, come on, guys. I mean, I have it set up to automatically upload to a OneDrive account. But I don't want to check that. It shouldn't be that. It should be more difficult than it is. Unfortunately, I don't think they've added anything like that into this update, but it does seem, I've seen multiple people who are pretty skeptical or not really a big fan of the Xbox app on PC, saying that it is legitimately a lot better. So it's good. Brian Horton, former creative director of Insomniac's Wolverine, which I think has been officially announced. It has, but we don't know anything about it. It also suffered from that, what was probably pretty devastating leak, a year or two ago now, where like it seemed like basically everything about that game got leaked, including like tons of captured footage from like a pre-alpha state of the game, and it looked like it was in rough shape. It wasn't in rough shape. All games look like that. If you've never played a like pre-alpha or alpha build of a game, most gamers don't realize how terrible games look until like right before they release. When like if you've ever played in a beta, if you played in a real beta for a game, you may have seen some unfinished stuff. most of the betas that publishers have released in the last like 10 or 15 years are really just demos. The games are normally done. Like what you see is the final product. Very rarely have I seen a beta in the last few years that's been more than just a demo. Maybe a beta for like the sense of balancing multiplayer and things like that. But yeah, that footage of Wolverine was obviously very early. Well, that director, Brian Horton of that game, is now the creative director of Perfect Dark. I find that kind of interesting. From what we've seen and heard about Perfect Dark, I assume they already had a creative director, and that person's no longer that. So, probably more of a story there. There's the whole legendary thing about that studio, who's making it, and how they were supposed to be like this like quadruple A studio, supposedly. And it's turned out that they're actually a really tiny studio that's using, I believe, Square Enix as a support studio. So I don't know. What we saw from that game back in the last Xbox showcase this last summer looked cool. It was obviously very stylized. It was probably in engine, but it was definitely a very catered thing that we got to see from that game. But I thought it looked neat. The concept is cool. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Having someone who is attached to really any of PlayStation's IPs in their first party is probably a good thing. That's going to bring a good perspective, a good kind of framework for how this game is going to be developed under their watch. And hopefully that's a good thing for Perfect Dark. Black Ops 6 is the biggest Call of Duty release ever. And it's setting single day records for Game Pass subscriber editions. Yeah, this is what everyone expected. There's been some really, in my opinion, really bad faith articles and stuff going around of, what was it? Some of it has been like, oh, look how few people are completing the single player mode, of Call of Duty. Yeah, that's the big one. It's, oh, all of these people have downloaded Black Ops, but they aren't playing it. They're just downloading it because they have Game Pass. Or that, you know, all these people playing it, that doesn't mean it's a good thing for Xbox or ABK, because they're getting it for free through Game Pass. And it's just like one of those things where you can tell people are having such a hard time wrapping their mind around the idea that Xbox isn't doing the PlayStation thing. They're doing something different. It doesn't mean it's better. It doesn't mean it's going to work. Even as someone who's an Xbox fan, I have no idea. I'm not smart enough to know those things. But what's frustrating, I don't really care when like gamers do it on Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, all that. I don't really care what about them, because most gamers, including myself to a point, don't really know how this stuff works. And they're not supposed to. They're just gamers, right? What's frustrating is that when you see those same talking points coming from like journalists, and I understand that like 95% of gaming journalists are basically just like failed Twitch streamers and YouTubers with WordPad on their computer. And so that they aren't doing like in-depth research. They aren't really that curious about learning how things actually work. They're just trying to pump out 5 articles a day. I get it. But the problem is, you know, there's some assumption of competence. There's some assumption of them knowing what they're talking about and what they're doing, and having to like back up their words or having some kind of sources and stuff. And so when you see people like that doing this whole thing of like, oh, bad news for Xbox, all these people are playing Call of Duty on Game Pass. It's like, no, that's why they bought ABK. You know, that story from last week that I talked about where they have like 20 IPs that have made over $1 billion or whatever. You know, that's why you buy ABK. You have I mean, they are the biggest publisher in the world now. Xbox is. Whether people like it or not, whether it's a story, you know, it's not a negative story, so it's not going to get talked about. But they are the biggest publisher in the world, and they do that. They did that to, well, make a lot of money, obviously, but to also try to boost up their own product, Game Pass, which in turn boosts all their other products around it in theory, right? And so it's so frustrating for me to see these topics come up of like, oh, everyone's just playing on Game Pass. Like, yeah, Yes, they are. That is absolutely correct. At least the Xbox players and some of the PC players. But that's not counting all the people on PlayStation who are paying full price for it. That's not the biggest thing that with Call of Duty. Why I don't think it's been covered enough. Maybe it will be at some point. Is Call of Duty is a cross-gen game still. Call of Duty Black Ops 6, I believe, is coming out on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 4 Pro, which again, remember, though that generation of PlayStation has had over 100 million units sold, I believe. And so and there's still a lot of people playing in that gen. And same with Xbox One, Xbox One X, Xbox One S, all those. Uh, and there's a good number of those sold as well. And so this game it's gonna make a ton of money, and that's why they bought them. It's the same thing and I didn't put it in the notes to this week, but the Xbox and Microsoft released their earnings, and Xbox is making a bunch more money than they did a year ago. And the conversation around it's always the asterisk of, well, they jumped, it was like 50% more profit or something. And it was all ABK. It's like, yes, that's why they bought ABK. Like, I understand maybe they're just trying to like explain why they're making so much money so quickly, but it's that's why they bought them. And it's going to take them years and years and years to, in theory, make the money back they spent on ABK. Even though it really just came from on-hand cash that Microsoft just sits on because they're one of the biggest companies in the world. But anyway, that's beyond my knowledge. I don't really fully understand all that. But like, it's just weird how every success that Xbox has gets qualified. It's always qualified. Oh, it's Game Pass. Oh, it's from ABK. Oh, it's this, it's that. I don't know. Regardless, Black Ops 6, super successful. I played through the single player already. It's only like 8 or 9 hours. It's fairly short. I think it can be as short as like 6 if you buzz through it. It was awesome. It was really, really cool. A lot of people have talked about how great the ending is. I actually didn't love the ending. I probably would have had the single player as like a 9 out of 10. But I thought the ending kind of fell flat for me, at least. Maybe I don't know enough about Black Ops. But there was a mission like in the middle of the game that just did something really cool. It just did something really fun, something unique. Black Ops, I feel like, is always the one that's a little more experimental, where the Modern Warfare games tend to be a little more, formulaic, which I still like. The 2019 Modern Warfare is one of my favorite. I liked the second one that came out, like 2021 or something. And then Modern Warfare 3, I never even played it because it was supposed to be a DLC and they turned it into its own game. Anyways, at the end of the day, Black Ops 6 has been huge. It's one of the first big examples of like, oh, this is why Xbox bought ABK, despite all of the trouble. This is why, and it's gonna show. It's also why I'm not as worried as some people pretend to be about Xbox putting their games on other platforms and stuff. Like, it doesn't seem like they're gonna do it with everything. They're just gonna do it with the stuff that it makes sense for. And at the end of the day, as long as they still have their own hardware option, I kind of don't care. Because as long as they're making money, no matter how they're doing it, they'll stay around. And maybe even just for nostalgia's sake to a point, I suspect they'll always have hardware. Especially because they're always going to want to support those people who have attached themselves to their platform, and who don't want to lose those games that they've bought all the way back to the Xbox 360. So good for Xbox, good for ABK. Black Ops 6 is, the Call of Duty every year is always big, but this seems like it's on kind of a different level because they took it to a different level. Stalker 2 is coming out here soon, here in a few weeks, and it will have mod support on console. That's pretty cool, pretty uncommon. We see this, Bethesda is actually pretty good about this. I know I've played Fallout 4 and Starfield on console with mods. It's really neat. I believe Skyrim has it as well, but Stalker kind of following that same thing. I won't pretend like I'm an expert on the Stalker franchise. I do know that the Stalker, the original games, the game, and then everything that came out after it, were the mods were really the bigger part of that fandom and all that. It sounds like so. them having mod support on console, even if it's sort of limited, it's awesome. It's really, really cool. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, some previews came out about that this week. They announced that it will have a 60 FPS mode on Series X and S. That's really cool. For a while there, that wasn't assumed with Xbox first-party games. They were typically coming out later. I think the only game that still doesn't have a 60 FPS mode from Xbox first-party is Hellblade 2. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do like an ultimate edition or something and have a patch that puts that in. But it's good to see that come in day one for these games. The previews of Indiana Jones were interesting. It seems like it was one of those things where it seems like everyone liked it, but really focused on the things they didn't like. So you would watch a podcast or read a preview and people would be like, oh, this other thing I didn't like. But this is trending to be like an 8 out of 10 for me, which is really good. Like that's a really good score. And so that'll be one of those ones where I'm afraid there won't be a lot of hype for it, because if you've actually read or listened to previews, they don't sound all that hyped, but then it's going to end up with like an 82 Metacritic score. It's going to end up with like a good Metacritic score. And then hopefully people will pay attention to it, but we'll have to wait and see. The final story for Xbox is the ABK QA staff has walked out in protest of return to office changes. And the kind of notable thing about this is, one, it's pretty dumb at this point to be trying to push back on the return to office stuff. It's just kind of standard, and at least in a lot of industries at this point, if it works. The claim here by these workers is that they aren't really trying to return people to the office, that it's specifically a ploy to get these people to quit, knowing they wouldn't want to do it. And I'm sure all of the big publishers, I'm sure everyone in tech at this point is happy to try to find a way to get people to quit without laying them off, because we know it in the gaming space that there's no shortage of these stories about layoffs, which we'll have multiple coming up. And they don't want that heat, so they would rather people just quit. And so, we talked, I think it was last week, about was like Bandai Namco and a few others, literally just reassigning people to empty rooms and not giving them any work until they quit on their own, rather than laying them off, because there's a cultural thing there that doesn't work. So, yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Moving over to PlayStation, we have Sony is shutting down Firewalk Studios, the studio that made Concord, as well as Neon Koi, which is a mobile studio in Germany. Firewalk is an interesting one. So that's the studio. I believe it's a bunch of former Call of Duty devs, or at least it was founded by them, if I remember. I could be mixing it up with another studio that PlayStation shut down a while ago. But they were just acquired in April of 2023. It was a year and a half ago. They'd obviously been working on Concord for years before that. And, they released Concord and it shut down, I think it was like a week and a half later. And it's gone. Like, it's done. Like, this is Firewalk done, Concord done. There were so many rumors. People being like, well, maybe they'll re-release it free to play and blah, blah, blah. That's not happening. It's interesting because when you hear people actually talk about Concord, it's like generally positive. The vibes are pretty good. People seem to generally enjoy it. But it just didn't have the juice. It was paid. And they were competing against a bunch of free to play games, and that's tough. And like established free to play games like Overwatch, like even if Overwatch 2 isn't as hyped up as it was with the original game and all that drama, it's still like, as well as some others, kind of the foundational games in those genres. And if you're going to challenge that, you can't do it as like a platform exclusive that you have to pay for. Like, that's just not a formula that's going to work. And it obviously didn't. It's really frustrating too, because, and I talked to a dev from another studio about it, and they were torn up because someone they know was at Firewalk and had done all of these like animations for that game that I've seen like shown off that are like beautiful. And it's easy to forget in these layoffs that, like, obviously it sucks that this whole studio shut down, and that they laid off everyone at those studios. But you also have to consider like the individuals. Like, yeah, maybe Concord wasn't a success, but there were things in Concord that were probably some industry leading stuff, whether it was animations or voice acting or rigging or things that I don't even fully understand, right? And that talent's lost, and then you have to hope from a consumer perspective, like, man, I hope those people who lost their jobs don't leave the industry. I hope they go somewhere else and keep doing cool stuff. Because if they leave the industry and go do something else, probably making more money, going, to work in like an animation studio or something like that, that hurts the game industry, and that hurts the future games we hope to receive one day. So, it sucks. I think the reaction to this has been interesting. It was obviously all of the expected copy pasted things from all of the concerned journalists of, oh, this is awful. I feel so bad for all these workers. I put on my Xbox hat. I put on my, my green hat with Phil Spencer's face on it. And man, the reaction to this, in my opinion, which is biased and maybe isn't reliable, but I find it really hard to believe that the reaction to this isn't different than it would have been with Xbox. Even looking back, like the shutdown of these two studios isn't really much different, in my opinion, than when Xbox shut down the Hi-Fi Tango Gameworks and those like other studios. Well, it was Arcane Austin, which is a pretty big one, but then there were a couple of small studios. They either reassigned people or shut down, and the reactions sure were different, in my opinion. I understand there are different situations with the games and stuff like that. Tango, I've talked about it a lot. Tango was a studio that hadn't had a really successful game in like over a decade, and hadn't, just didn't really have the juice and didn't seem like they had it moving forward. Maybe they will with their new publisher. And Arcane Austin was a similar one where they had a huge flub with Redfall and hadn't really done much before that except help with like Dishonored, I think. So I just think it's interesting to note, to notice that, everyone was sad for 2 hours, and everyone talked about it on their daily podcast and all that. And then this went away. And something tells me that we won't be bringing this up every single time PlayStation does anything for the next year. The way that, that happens with Tango and Arcane with Xbox every week, it seems like. I mean, the simple fact is, at least in my opinion, is that PlayStation just has they've earned a lot of credit from their consumers and from journalists. They've earned a lot of overhead, and that is still helping them obviously quite a bit, because it's, allowing people to kind of maybe ignore, some of these issues that they have. And when these things happen to them, and maybe the reactions are a little bit different than when they happen to other people, to other platforms, but that is probably running out. PlayStation is not releasing games. Like, I've pointed it out a few times, and it's strange to me it doesn't get talked about by the bigger talking heads. But like Ragnarok came out a few years ago. Spider-Man 2 came out, over a year ago, I believe, at this point. I mean, Astrobot came out and it was good, but that's a double A project at best, right? And what's the next PlayStation game? Like, I know there's some third-party studios who will, Death Stranding 2 will be coming, and they had the Final Fantasy games this year, but like, and Helldivers is kind of in that middle space, but, we don't know when Wolverine's coming, and that's probably their next game. I have to imagine. We have no indication that Sony Santa Monica has anything coming soon. We have no indication that Naughty Dog has anything coming soon. We don't know. Insomniac will probably release 2 games before either of those studios release anything. So interesting. Feel crappy for those devs. I hope they all find a new spot or a new job, and we'll be paying attention to it. The PlayStation 5 Slim Plates won't fit the PlayStation 5 Pro, despite appearing to have the exact same dimensions. And I guess it's the connection points on the PS5 Slim and Pro are different for the plates. So even though the plates appear to be the same shape, because I believe that the Slim and the Pro, the difference is the Pro is wider, but that's like the middle section that you can't replace. And it's taller, but it's got that strip in the middle that actually makes that space. So I believe, or at least what I've seen people talk about, is that the dimensions of the four panels or whatever it is are the same, but for whatever reason, the connection points on the Pro are different than the Slim, so they won't work. I swear, when the Pro got announced, I saw like journalists posting articles being like, and the best part is all your stuff will fit. Maybe I'm making that up, but I remember it being like a conversation point and it not being a bad thing. And then now, like right before the Pro launches, they're like, "Oh, by the way, that's not gonna work. It's sorry, our bad." So we'll have to see what happens with that. Last, Bungie says Marathon is on track, but they are not ready to show anything yet. That's a story I'm really hoping succeeds. I really want Marathon. I don't particularly love Bungie. It kind of seems like they may be kind of a dysfunctional studio, with all of the bouncing around they've done and the issues they've had with Destiny 1 and 2. But I don't want bad things to happen to studios. And in my opinion, the writing seems to be on the wall for Bungie that it's going to get absorbed into or shut down by PlayStation sooner than later. And I suspect whatever happens with Marathon will end up being a pretty big factor in that. And it may be what happens with Marathon before we ever see it. My fear is that we'll never see Marathon and Bungie will get shut down / absorbed before it even comes out. The best case scenario is that Marathon does release, Bungie stays their own studio, and it does really well, and it kind of saves them. But the big thing I think most people think would save Bungie would be Destiny 3, and the indications are that we've got is that there's no plans for Destiny 3 right now. So interesting times over there. The only Nintendo news I had this week was a spokesperson denied rumors that Nintendo was doing the Bandai Namco style layoffs where you assign someone to an empty room until they quit. That was a rumor that popped up. They dismissed it pretty quickly. I don't know. Nintendo is a company that, one, because of where they're based and how things are there, and just financials, they probably don't need to lay people off. But that doesn't mean they won't. We know that's not a requirement anymore. Jumping into some other gaming news, we have Dragon Age the Veilguard released on Friday, or on Thursday, my bad. Today's Friday. That's why I'm recording. OpenCritic has a score of 82. It was as high as almost 90 right when it launched, with a couple dozen reviews, but some mixed reviews have taken that down a bit, but they're still overall extremely high. It surpassed over 70,000 concurrent players on Steam on Thursday, on like a Thursday evening. I think the true peak is probably going to be on like Saturday afternoon. So we'll have to wait and see how it does, but that's extremely good. Technically, that's a record for BioWare on Steam. It's worth noting that I believe Anthem and Andromeda did not release on Steam day one, or maybe at all. I can't remember. Because EA was using their own launcher. There's been some issues there, but it's still a good number for a single player, long RPG game to be on there. The general reaction has been extremely positive. I would say extremely positive, a subset of people being kind of neutral on it, and then a relatively small but very loud number of people being negative on it. But overall, the reaction's been very good. Probably the most notable negative reaction to it was by SkillUp, who's a pretty notable reviewer, has earned a lot of cachet in the industry. I am aware of them because they were a Division streamer back when I was, content creator. He tried streaming. He was kind of bad at it. He's a really good YouTuber though, and transitioned from being a Division creator to a more generalist, and it's been really good for him. His review was weird, and there's been a lot of conversation about it. My issue isn't completely with his review. He's obviously entitled to his thoughts. He's more than earned it, and earned his voice, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's just a few choices in the review that I thought were kind of interesting, and I worried. It seemed like he portrayed some things in a way that seemed to be kind of pandering to a certain kind of consumer or viewer, the kind of toxic, anti-woke, all that. And I don't think he is those things. But I also don't think he's dumb. And I think if he saw an opportunity to cater to those types of people to boost his clicks, I think he would do it. And if that hypothesis is what I have, it seems like that worked. Whether or not it was on purpose, it might not have been. He may have just been expressing the way he feels about the game, and it just happened to hit with those people. But there were things in his video that were kind of interesting to me, where he opens it up pretty early by saying it's more disappointing than Anthem, which is pretty wild because Anthem has been panned pretty hard for being a complete disappointment and a failure as a game, and its scores reflected it. And he's saying that about a game that is doing a lot better, that isn't a complete failure, it seems, both from a sales and review perspective. So that was kind of weird, just because he was so far away from what other people are thinking. He also had this kind of, in my opinion, kind of cringy quote in it, talking about how conversations or interactions in the game feel like you're sitting in an HR room, because there's not, you can't be like a renegade character in this game. And some of the dialogue is a little bland, but I don't think it's that bad from my experience so far. And that was weird. It was just the way it was portrayed was strange. And then he had this whole part of his video where he's like, hey, he's just so, in my opinion, again, I'm trying to throw out my opinion a lot because it doesn't matter, right? But he really did this, like, in my opinion, overly dramatic, like, I try to be constructive when I'm critical about video games, and I just can't be with this game. And it's like, it goes back to the disappointment thing. It's like, if he did, when he did his video on like the Golem game, when he did, even on Redfall, even though I think there was some that had, I don't know, it was pretty bad. Like, if you're talking about a game that is being universally panned, it's pretty easy to be like, I just can't be constructive about this. But to say that about a game that's being like universally enjoyed by most people, it's strange. And what I was worried about, it's not that he has those opinions. I don't, this is the first video of his I've seen in a while. I don't really vibe with him anymore. And so it doesn't, like, he's allowed to have his opinion. That's obvious. I want to be very clear about that. My issue is that it felt a little bit like some of this stuff was like maybe exaggerated. Maybe some of this stuff was sensationalized a bit to cater to a certain audience, and it worked. That's what happened. And whether that was on purpose or not, I have no idea. We'll never know. I'll let you decide. I'm sure you will disagree with me, as many people have so far. But if you look on Steam, where it's being review bombed, even though it's mostly positive, so it's been outdone by people being positive, I guess. But if you see all these negative reviews, especially, God, in my YouTube comments on videos I've made about Dragon Age, it's just people quoting him, basically, or stealing his critiques. And then it's a bunch of racist, awful stuff along with it. And so for me, it's one of those things where it's like, I made a tweet to this effect. It's cool to have critical reviews of games, even if they're universally being praised. Not everyone's gonna like everything. I get that. But I think there is some responsibility, especially on the biggest creators in the space, to consider the way you're portraying things and think about how those things may be used in nefarious ways. It doesn't mean he has to pull his punches. It doesn't mean that he has to be positive about every game, or him or anyone else, really. But it's just, the interesting thing to me was that on Reddit, I follow a handful of subreddits on there, the bigger gaming ones. I didn't see a single review posted about Dragon Age the Veilguard, a game with a 80 plus Metacritic and OpenCritic score, other than Skill Ups. And Skill Ups was posted on every single one. And the comments were just filled with all the vitriol, all the homophobic, misogynistic, anti-woke, anti-DEI things, quotes from his video. Just everyone being like, I'm glad someone said, doing the thing that you see, this dogpiling stuff that happens all the time. And again, I hope that wasn't his goal, was to pander to those people, but it definitely did. Like, it definitely struck a chord with the Grumses and the Hypnotics and all these losers who spend every day, sensationalizing and being toxic about all this stuff. And he's like the king of them right now, whether he meant to be or not. So it's not that he's critical in his review. There's other critical reviews too. There's not very many of them, but there are other ones. But his in particular has obviously struck a chord with people for various reasons. And I think it sucks that it seems like, whether it was on purpose or not, he just handed them an ammo cache of credibility for these really crappy opinions. So, oh well. My first impressions, I've played about 6 hours of Dragon Age: The Veilguard, and I love it. It's really cool. I'm not a big Dragon Age fan. I'm not like a high fantasy kind of player in general. I'm not a sword and board type of guy. I like me a gun, right? But I've enjoyed it so far. It looks a lot better than I thought it was. Like, obviously the environments look great. I'm still not huge on the character designs. The kind of weird mix of like stylized and somewhat realistic aesthetic is still kind of jarring to me. But I also really like most of the designs I've seen. There's been a few who I don't love. Even my own Rook, I don't really love the protagonist. But it's fine. The whole thing with the conversations, I haven't gotten that yet. The conversations are fine. I play a ton of BioWare games. I've played Mass Effect, the trilogy Mass Effect of 20 plus times now. So maybe I'm just used to it. Maybe their style is something I'm used to and it doesn't bother me. I don't know. It's all subjective, right? But I love the combat. The combat's a ton of fun, especially as I've been getting more powerful and unlocking more things. Um, yeah, it's cool. I really like it so far. It sounds like the beginning is kind of the low point for most people. That the third act, the final act, is where it really picks up for almost everyone. Apparently, the ending is really really cool. And so I've been kind of, I'm trying to work my way towards that. I am kind of speed running it. I want to get to that ending and check it out, and then I would love to at some point replay and take my time and do everything a different time. So we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, overall, I would say it's sitting. My current review score would probably be like an 8 out of 10. I feel pretty good there. The ending could bring it up, could bring it down. We'll have to wait and see. There was a couple other weird things that happened with this game. A few days before it released, someone said they got footage from a friend and used the footage that was captured by someone who was reviewing the game early to really push a bunch of the really toxic, really, really awful stuff on Twitter. They were direct messaging leaks to people who were excited about the game to try to spoil it for them. This person was pretty awful. And then when the reviews came out on Monday, lo and behold, Mr. Maddie Plays, a pretty notable and well-known game reviewer and commentator, who's also on some podcasts and stuff, his protagonist character was the exact same one in this leaked footage. So everyone dogpiled on him pretty hard. It's cool with me. I've a lot of people, especially in the BioWare sphere, like him. I don't really get it. I just don't vibe with his style. I think he seems kind of scummy. I don't know. And this is before any of this stuff. He came out with a apology, quote unquote, claiming that he sent footage to an editor and that's the person who leaked it, or leaked it to the person who leaked it. Real strange explanation in my opinion. It definitely feels very much like oh yes, like it feels like he's kind of trying to hand wave it a little bit and be like, oh yeah, that was someone else's fault. But I stand by my opinions, because he also was one of the people who had kind of a pretty negative review on the game. And he does play into that like nasty side of the gaming community 100%. It's also partially due to the podcast group he's a part of and stuff like that, but that's a different story. So I don't believe him. It's going to be up to BioWare and these other companies if they do, and whether or not he gets blacklisted or not. He probably won't, because one thing I found in this content creation game is that if you have a big enough audience, these studios and platforms and publishers you have to basically murder someone on camera to get blacklisted. You would be amazed the things that I've seen people get away with and still get support by all these big publishers. So we'll have to wait and see. I don't know. I've only seen him comment on the situation once. We'll see if he names and shames and actually proves his story. But something tells me he's going to move on as quickly as possible from it. And then the obvious, all the weirdos that have been dog on this game for the last year and hoping for it to fail and all that. Now that it's doing really, really well, both in review score and seemingly in sales, they're all saying that it's, I've seen everything. I've seen, BioWare bought their own copies. BioWare only gave it to reviewers who would give them good scores. BioWare It's the same stuff you see every time. Um, I don't know. Seems like it's doing well. It's a good game. I enjoy it. It's not like a 10 out of 10 for me. I'm not going to sit here and pretend. It's probably still not my game of the year. We'll see how it plays out in the long run. Um, but I don't know. People just can't let things be cool and fun. For the future of BioWare Mass Effect, we've already had the CEO of EA come out and speak very positively about the reaction to Veilguard, to how its sales and pre-orders and stuff were going. It doesn't seem like there's any guarantee that BioWare is safe necessarily, or that the next Mass Effect game is safe. But it seems like this was, short of it getting like a 90 plus Metacritic score and like sweeping Game of the Year awards, short of that, it seems like this was the best result. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the long run. And then we have N7 Day coming up here in less than a week. For a long time, I kind of thought the proximity to the release of Veilguard would mean we won't get much from N7 Day. But with some rumors that things are maybe a little dicey for BioWare, I could definitely see them be like, F it. Let's show them what we got for Mass Effect. Let's carry this momentum from Veilguard. Let's get people excited and show EA like, hey, people are here for this thing that we're doing. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this next N7 Day is like kind of a blowout when it comes to info, or it might be nothing. We'll have to wait and see. The last few stories here, Alan Wake 2 has recouped most of its development and marketing costs, but they have not profited yet on the project. There's been a bunch of weird stuff going on around Remedy with like funding partners and publishing and all this stuff. Has me a little worried for him, if I have to be totally honest, but hopefully that's unfounded. Fortnite is getting rid of individual season pass currencies where you used to have to earn things in every pass. It seems like now it's just going to be one big thing. I doubt very many people who listen to this are big Fortnite fans, but I think that's a big deal for the free-to-play market, to see them start to simplify things. My guess is that probably even Fortnite is starting to notice a little bit of people getting a little tired of that formula. GameSpot and Fandom were hit with layoffs. I believe it was around 16 people who got laid off. Sucks. That's also who owns. If you're a Giant Bomb fan, that is that'd be a scary business to be in right now. Anything associated with fandom, I would not feel very comfortable. If you think the game developer situation is iffy, then pay attention to what's going on in gaming media. It is a nightmare. As much as I don't think that a lot of those folks are doing a very good job. It doesn't mean I wish badly on any of them. And I can appreciate that is probably a very stressful business to be in right now. And then the final bit here, Inflection Games, the makers of Nightingale, the survival kind of high fantasy whatever game. It's a bunch of former BioWare devs who started it, shut down their UK studio and laid off all that staff. Is the thing with that, we saw this rush a few years ago of all of these former AAA like directors leave their studios and go start their own, and they all announced their studios as, we're a indie AAA studio making this kind of game, and there's literally dozens of these that popped up, a few years ago, COVID times, a little before, a little after, and they're just dropping like flies. Because the idea of being an indie studio, but also trying to make a AAA game and just hoping you get a good deal from a publisher or whatever, that the money's not cheap right now. Until interest rates drop more and stuff like that, you're not going to get a lot of venture capital support and all that. So it's a scary time for all these devs, and I wish them all the best. For some content updates, I'll be doing some more Veilguard streams over the next few days and weeks, presumably. And I'll be doing a bunch of N7 Day coverage this coming week. I was off work all week to do a bunch of stuff that I wanted to do. I am taking N7 Day off, but the days before and the day after, I'm going to be slammed with work. So I'll do as much coverage as I can on N7 Day before and after. But be patient with me. I do expect to release a new Mass Effect Hypecast. I do expect to release one probably a week after that will hopefully be with N7 Legend, and we'll talk about what we think about what's going on there, and kind of give our different takes on everything. And yeah, that's what's coming up. Then we'll have the Game Awards coming up and the end of the year and a few games coming out. And it's going to be an interesting end of 2024. And that will also be the end of this podcast episode. If you have your own topics, questions, or feedback on the show, be sure to let me know in the Discord, in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on social media at Baundiesel or at the Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time.